Screams echoed across the battlefield as the human shock troops of the 501st Battalion shattered the tyrant alien empire lines. Hardened alien warriors froze in terror, watching their formations collapse under the furious human assault. This was no ordinary attack. Led by Captain Jacob Mason, the elite soldiers unleashed a storm of unorthodox tactics, lightning flanking maneuvers, feigned retreats, devastating orbital strikes on key positions. The tyrant commanders, masters of 100 conquered worlds, suddenly found themselves outmatched and outfought by an inferior force. As the aliens fled in disarray, the Kobali rebel allies stared in amazement. The human methods were like nothing they'd ever seen, brutally effective and lethally unpredictable. Word spread quickly. Humanity held the key to victory against the tyrants. Maybe the only key. The Galactic Council took notice. Long reliant on rigid military doctrines, the galaxy's ruling body saw its forces crumbling before the tyrant onslaught. Desperate for any advantage, they swallowed their pride and humbly petitioned the 501st to share its secrets, to teach them how to fight like humans. For Captain Mason, the request posed a dilemma. His battalion's tactics were their greatest asset, hard-won through blood and sacrifice. To reveal them could mean disaster. But the stakes for the galaxy were too high. The tyrants had to be stopped, at any cost. The deal was struck. Mason and his team would train an elite cadre of Kobali warriors, led by the prodigious Lieutenant Gruss. Two races, as different as life and death, forced together by the specter of annihilation. As the training begins, the humans and Kobali must overcome generations of distrust and culture clash. Failure means extinction. Success requires forging a new kind of alliance, a union of human cunning and alien skill. In a galaxy on the brink, the 501st and their unlikely partners prepare for war on a scale never before imagined. The countdown to oblivion has begun. As the training began on Theros Prime, the clash of cultures was immediate and intense. Captain Mason's unorthodox methods grated against the rigid Kobali mindset like metal on stone. In the grand lecture halls of the Galactic Council's military academy, the human instructors unleashed a whirlwind of strange ideas and unconventional strategies. Adaptability is key, Mason barked, pacing before the assembled ranks of Kobali warriors. The battlefield is chaos, plans fall apart, situations change in a heartbeat. You have to be ready to improvise, to seize opportunities when they arise. Lieutenant Gruss, first among the Kobali trainees, stood stiffly at attention, his reptilian features unreadable. With respect, Captain, he said, the Kobali way of war has served us well for generations. Our strategies are time-tested and proven. Mason fixed him with a hard stare. Against the tyrants, Lieutenant, your strategies have proven only one thing, that you need new ones. Tensions simmered as the training wore on. The humans pushed the Kobali to their limits, demanding they think faster, react quicker, embrace the unexpected. In the sweltering heat of the live-fire range, frustrations boiled over. This is madness, Gruss hissed, ducking behind a crumbling wall as simulated plasma fire stitched the air above his head. We're leaving ourselves open to attack, ignoring basic principles of defense. Beside him, Sergeant Hawkins, a grizzled human veteran, laughed mirthlessly. Welcome to the madness, Lieutenant. If you can't adapt, you die. Gruss glared but held his tongue. There would be time for debate later. Now there was only the exercise, and the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, the humans were onto something. As the days turned to weeks, Mason unveiled his masterstroke. Mixed human Kobali teams, each forced to rely on the other for survival. Gruss found himself paired with Hawkins, the two warriors as different as sun and shadow. At first they clashed at every turn. Hawkins' disdain for the Kobali way was matched only by Gruss's contempt for human recklessness. But as the war games intensified, as simulated tyrant forces pressed them to the brink, an unlikely respect began to grow. Gruss marveled at Hawkins' instincts, his ability to predict enemy moves and exploit weaknesses. Hawkins, in turn, came to appreciate Gruss's discipline, his unwavering focus in the heat of battle. Slowly, grudgingly, they found a middle ground, a fusion of human audacity and Kobali precision. The final exercise was a revelation. Human and Kobali moved as one, a symphony of controlled chaos that shattered the simulated tyrant defenses. As the last virtual foe fell, a cheer went up from the assembled warriors. Mason allowed himself a tight smile. They had done it. Against impossible odds, humans and aliens had forged an alliance that just might turn the tide of war. The tyrants, for all their might, would tremble before what was to come. But even as the celebrations echoed through the halls of Theros Prime, a darker shadow gathered at the edge of known space. The tyrant emperor, hidden in his fortress world, studied the reports of the joint training with a cold, calculating eye. Let the humans and their new pets have their moment, he mused. It would be short-lived. Already his fleets were on the move, a tidal wave of dread and destruction poised to crash upon the galaxy. The final war was coming, and this time there would be no escape. The calm after the training exercise was shattered by the shriek of alarms. Captain Mason's comm link crackled to life, the voice on the other end tight with urgency. Bastion Prime is under attack. All forces to battle stations. Mason locked eyes with Lieutenant Gruss, a grim understanding passing between them. The real test had begun. As they raced to the command center, the sky above Bastion Prime erupted in fire. Tyrant warships materialized from hyperspace, their weapons already blazing. The orbital defense grid, caught off guard, struggled to respond. Inside the command center, chaos reigned. Screens flickered with damage reports and frantic communications. Mason barked orders, his mind racing to formulate a plan. Gruss, take your best marksmen to the eastern quadrant. We need to slow their ground assault. The Kobali lieutenant nodded sharply and sprinted away, shouting orders in his native tongue. Mason turned to Sergeant Hawkins. Get our heavies to the main gate. We hold that line at all costs. The next hours blurred into a maelstrom of fire and blood. Tyrant dropships punched through the weakening defenses, disgorging waves of shock troops. The joint human Kobali force met them with desperate fury, their newly forged bonds tested in the crucible of real combat. Mason found himself in the thick of it, plasma rounds sizzling past his head as he directed a counterattack. Nearby, Gruss led a squad of Kobali snipers, their precision fire dropping tyrant officers with unerring accuracy. But for every enemy they felled, two more seemed to take their place. The defenders were pushed back, inch by bloody inch, towards the heart of the outpost. Captain, Hawkins's voice crackled over the comm. We've got a problem. Some kind of stealth units are hitting our power grid. We're losing systems across the board. Mason cursed. This was no ordinary assault. He keyed his comm, hailing Gruss. Lieutenant, rendezvous at Sector 7. We've got infiltrators. They met in a corridor choked with smoke, the distant thunder of battle echoing through the walls. Gruss's scales were streaked with alien blood, his eyes narrow with focus. What's the plan, Captain? Mason's mind raced, piecing together fragments of intel and battlefield instinct. They're after our infrastructure. We need to draw them out, force them to fight on our terms. A plan took shape, born of human cunning and Kobali precision. They would use the very chaos of the battle to their advantage, turning the sprawling industrial sector into a deadly maze. As they moved through the twisting corridors and cavernous machine halls, Mason marveled at how seamlessly they worked together. Human and Kobali, so different yet united in purpose. The trap was sprung in the heart of a massive fusion reactor. Commander Zarkath, the tyrant's feared special operative, found himself suddenly outflanked and outgunned. What followed was a deadly dance of shadows and steel. Mason's unconventional tactics kept the enemy off balance, while Gruss's intimate knowledge of the outpost's layout allowed them to anticipate and counter each move. One by one, Zarkath's operatives fell. The tyrant commander himself proved a formidable opponent, his augmented body a blur of lethal precision. But against the combined might of Mason and Gruss, even he could not prevail. As Zarkath lay defeated, Mason allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. But there was no time to savor the victory. The battle for Bastion Prime still raged. With renewed vigor, they rallied their forces for a final push. Human ingenuity melded with Kobali firepower in a symphony of destruction. Precision strikes crippled tyrant landing zones, while daring raids sowed confusion in their command structure. The tide turned. Tyrant ships, their landing zones in flames and ground forces in disarray, began to pull back. The defenders of Bastion Prime, bloodied but unbowed, watched as the enemy fleet retreated into the void. In the command center, Mason and Gruss stood side by side, surveying the aftermath. The cost had been high, but they had held. More than that, they had proven that their alliance could withstand the crucible of real combat. But even as the first whispers of victory spread through the battered outpost, a new threat loomed. The comm channels erupted with urgent reports. The tyrant emperor had made his move. Mason's teeth clenched as he listened to the dire proclamation. Total war. The entire galaxy now stood on the brink of annihilation. He turned to Gruss, seeing his own purpose mirrored in the Cabali's alien eyes. Words were unnecessary. They both knew the real battle was just beginning. The Tyrant Emperor's proclamation echoed through the command center, each word a hammer blow to the fragile peace. Captain Mason's eyes hardened as he absorbed the implications. Total war, annihilation on a galactic scale. He turned to Lieutenant Gruss, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. The battle for Bastion Prime had forged an alliance stronger than either could have imagined. Now, that bond would be tested like never before. Within hours, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Mason and Gruss found themselves thrust into the spotlight, their successful defense of Bastion Prime held up as a blueprint for survival. The Council's decree was swift and unprecedented, a unified military force combining the strengths of humanity and the allied races. "Congratulations, gentlemen," Admiral Zhao announced, her holographic form flickering before them. "You've been promoted. Welcome to Valkyrie." The next weeks passed in a blur of training and preparation. The newly formed strike team, a mix of human soldiers and Kobali warriors, pushed themselves to the limit, melding their disparate fighting styles into a cohesive whole. Mason marveled at the progress, watching as cultural barriers crumbled in the face of shared purpose. Their baptism by fire came sooner than expected. Intelligence reports revealed a massive Tyrant shipyard under construction on Corvin 5, a vital industrial world. If completed, it would churn out warships faster than the Alliance could hope to counter. "We hit them hard, we hit them fast," Mason briefed the team, holographic schematics of the orbital dockyards hovering before them. "Our objective is to seize control of those unfinished ships and turn them against their makers." Gruss nodded, his scaled features set in relentless drive. "A bold plan, Captain. The Tyrants won't expect us to wield their own technology against them." The insertion was textbook. Valkyrie's stealth shuttles slipped past the planetary defenses, their hybrid cloaking fields, a marriage of human ingenuity and Kobali biotech, rendering them invisible to Tyrant sensors. They docked with the skeletal frames of half-built warships, the team splitting into pre-assigned groups. Mason found himself alongside Gruss, racing through the cavernous hull of what would have been a Tyrant dreadnought. They worked in perfect sync, human and Kobali, rewiring alien systems and jury-rigging controls. "Shields online," Gruss called out, his clawed hands dancing over an improvised control panel. "Weapons, responsive, but at reduced capacity." Mason grinned, the rush of adrenaline singing in his veins. "It'll have to do. All teams, report in." One by one, the other squads confirmed their ships were under control. A ragtag fleet of half-finished monstrosities, crewed by the most unlikely alliance in galactic history. "Valkyrie actual to all ships," Mason broadcast. "Commence attack run. Hit them with everything we've got." The Tyrant defenders never stood a chance. Caught completely off guard, their own unfinished warships turned against them in a storm of plasma fire and improvised tactics. Mason watched in awe as human piloting skills merged seamlessly with Kobali weapons expertise, creating a symphony of destruction. Within hours, the orbital shipyards were reduced to drifting wreckage. Corvin 5's formidable defenses lay in ruins, and the planet itself was firmly under Alliance control. As the dust settled, Mason allowed himself a moment of victory. But even as reports of their triumph spread across the galaxy, inspiring hope and rallying new allies to their cause, a shadow loomed. The Tyrant Emperor would not take this defeat lightly. His response would be swift and terrible. In the depths of his fortress world, the Emperor unleashed his newest creations, cybernetically enhanced assassins, engineered for a single purpose, to eliminate the leaders of this fledgling alliance. The Wraith Killers were loose and the galaxy trembled. Mason's comm link chimed, Admiral Zhao's face appearing, etched with concern. Captain, we have a situation. High-ranking officials are being targeted. We need Valkyrie to... Her words were cut off by the sound of shattering glass and a blood-curdling scream. The feed went dark. Mason exchanged a grim look with Gruss. The real war had begun. Mason's mind raced, processing the implications of Admiral Zhao's sudden silence. He turned to Gruss, the Kobali's eyes reflecting his own unshakable focus. We need to move now, Mason said, already striding towards the command center's exit. If they've taken out Zhao, we're next on the list. Alarms blared throughout the station as they raced through corridors, dodging panicked personnel. Mason's comm link crackled with frantic reports of attacks across multiple sectors. The Wraith Killers had struck with devastating precision. In the chaos, a plan crystallized. Mason keyed his comm, broadcasting on a secure channel. All Valkyrie units, this is Captain Mason. Rendezvous at Hangar Bay 7. We're going on the offensive. Within minutes, the elite squad assembled. Human and Kobali warriors stood side by side, their differences forgotten in the face of a common threat. Mason quickly outlined their mission, detailing the intelligence on the Tyrant Emperor's massive flagship, Dominion. This is our chance to cut the head off the snake, he concluded, studying the faces of his team. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we don't stop until we reach the Emperor himself. As they boarded their stealth carrier, Mason felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The journey through contested space was fraught with danger, every moment bringing the risk of detection. Mines drifted silently in the void, while Tyrant patrols prowled like hungry predators. In the carrier's cramped cockpit, Mason and Gruss pored over tactical displays, plotting their approach to the Dominion. The Dreadnought's defenses were formidable, a network of flak batteries and fighter screens that seemed impenetrable. There, Gruss said suddenly, his clawed finger tapping a point on the holographic readout. A blind spot in their sensor coverage. If we time our assault just right... Mason nodded, a tight smile crossing his face. Good eye, Lieutenant. That's our opening. The carrier emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Dominion's defensive perimeter. Immediately, alarms blared as Tyrant sensors registered their presence. Mason's voice rang out over the comm. Archangel Squadron, launch! A swarm of starfighters erupted from the carrier's bays, engines flaring as they streaked towards the massive dreadnought. Mason found himself at the controls of a nimble attack craft, Gruss manning the weapon systems beside him. The space around the Dominion erupted in a firestorm of energy weapons and explosions. Archangel pilots wove through the chaos with preternatural skill, their attacks precisely coordinated to punch holes in the dreadnought's defenses. Mason's fighter shuddered as a near miss from a flak battery scorched its hull. He gritted his teeth, pushing the craft into a series of evasive maneuvers. Beside him, Gruss unleashed a barrage of return fire, his shots finding their mark with unerring accuracy. Flak battery Delta 9 is down, Gruss called out, his scaled fingers dancing over the weapon's controls. Our window is open, Captain. Mason nodded, keying his comm. All units converge on target coordinates. Prepare for phase insertion. The fighters regrouped, forming a tight formation around the assault shuttles, carrying Archangel's ground teams. As they approached the Dominion's hull, Mason's hand hovered over the activation switch for the experimental phase disruptors. Here goes nothing, he muttered, and pressed the button. Reality seemed to bend around them. For a heart-stopping moment, Mason felt as if his body was being pulled in 1,000 different directions at once. Then, with a lurch, they were through, materializing inside one of the Dominion's massive hangar bays. Alarms blared as Tyrant security forces scrambled to respond to the unexpected intrusion. Mason and Gruss leapt from their fighter, weapons at the ready. Around them, the rest of Archangel deployed, taking up defensive positions. Move out, Mason ordered, leading the charge towards the hangar's exit. We need to reach the throne room before they can organize a proper defense. But as they pushed deeper into the dreadnought's labyrinthine corridors, it became clear the Wraith Killers had anticipated their tactics. Enhanced warriors melted out of the shadows, their cybernetic implants gleaming in the harsh overhead lighting. The battle that ensued was unlike anything Mason had experienced before. Human ingenuity and Kobali precision clashed against the ruthless efficiency of the Emperor's elite guard. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, leaving scorch marks on metal bulkheads. Hand-to-hand combat erupted in tight spaces, the clash of steel and the crunch of broken bones echoing off the walls. As casualties mounted on both sides, Mason made a snap decision. He turned to Gruss, shouting over the din of battle. "We need to split up. Take half the team and push for the throne room. I'll lead the rest to draw their fire." Gruss nodded, understanding passing between them without need for further words. As the Kobali lieutenant led his group down a side passage, Mason rallied the remaining Archangel members for a frontal assault. "Hit them with everything we've got," he roared, charging forward into the teeth of the Wraith Killer defense. The diversionary attack worked, drawing the bulk of the enemy forces away from Gruss's infiltration team. Mason lost track of time as they fought their way through increasingly desperate tyrant resistance. Every corridor became a battleground, every junction a potential ambush point. Just as it seemed they might be overwhelmed, Mason's calm crackled to life. Gruss's voice came through, tense but triumphant. "Captain, we've reached the throne room, but it's empty. The Emperor's not here." Mason cursed under his breath, his mind racing. Where could the tyrant leader have gone? Then a memory surfaced, tactical briefings on the Dominion's layout. Of course. "The reactor core," he said, realization dawning. "He's retreated to the engineering decks. It's the most heavily armored section of the ship." As Alliance reinforcements finally broke through to their position, Mason gathered what remained of his team. They were battered, exhausted, but the fire of tenacity still burned in their eyes. "One last push," Mason told them, checking the charge on his weapon. "We end this now." They descended into the bowels of the Dominion, the thrum of the massive reactor growing louder with each step. Ahead lay the final confrontation, a battle that would determine the destiny of the universe. Mason strode forward, Gruss at his side, ready to face whatever horrors the tyrant emperor had in store for them. Mason and Gruss plunged deeper into the Dominion's heart, the reactor's thrum growing to a deafening roar. Sweat beaded on Mason's forehead as they navigated the twisting corridors of the engineering decks, each turn bringing them closer to their quarry. "Contact!" Gruss hissed, his scales rippling as he raised his weapon. A squad of Wraith Killers materialized from the shadows, their cybernetic enhancements glinting in the harsh light. Mason dove for cover behind a coolant conduit as plasma bolts sizzled past his head, the air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and burning metal. "Push through!" Mason shouted, returning fire. His shots found their mark, dropping two of the assassins. Gruss moved with fluid grace, his own attacks precise and devastating. The remaining Archangel forces rallied, forming a wedge that drove relentlessly towards the central reactor chamber. Mason's comm crackled with updates from the Alliance fleet above. The Dominion systems were failing, viral sabotage taking its toll. They burst into the reactor core, a cavernous space dominated by the pulsing heart of the dreadnought. There, encased in the gleaming battle armor, stood the tyrant emperor. "Archangel, take cover!" Mason barely had time to shout the warning before the chamber erupted in hellfire. The Emperor's advanced weaponry tore through their ranks. Mason watched in horror as his soldiers were cut down, their screams lost in the cacophony of battle. He turned to Gruss, a desperate plan forming. "Plant the charges," he ordered. "I'll keep him busy." Before Gruss could object, Mason sprinted from cover, drawing the Emperor's attention. Plasma bolts scorched the deck around him as he weaved and rolled, each near miss sending shivers down his spine. "Is this the best humanity can offer?" The Emperor's voice boomed, distorted by his armor speakers. Mason gritted his teeth, returning fire. His shots seemed to bounce harmlessly off the Emperor's defenses. From the corner of his eye, he saw Gruss and the surviving Archangel members placing high-yield explosives around the chamber's vital systems. The reactor began to sputter and spark, the Dominion's failing systems cascading into the ship's power core. Mason's comm lit up with frantic reports. Alliance reinforcements were fighting their way down, clashing with the last of the Wraithkiller elite. "Now!" Gruss shouted, signaling the charges were set. Mason didn't hesitate. He triggered the detonator, and the world exploded into chaos. The blast knocked him off his feet, sending him tumbling across the deck. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the reactor's containment field failing. The Emperor, momentarily staggered by the explosions, rounded on Mason. With inhuman speed, he closed the distance between them. Mason found himself locked in a desperate grapple, the Emperor's armored fists threatening to crush the life from him. "Gruss, go!" Mason managed to choke out. "That's an order!" He saw the conflict in his friend's eyes. Then, to Mason's horror, Gruss turned and charged back into the firestorm of the reactor breach. The Kobali warrior's clawed hands found purchase on the Emperor's armor, exploiting weak points that Mason's human eyes had missed. Together, they channeled years of shared combat experience into a frenzied assault. Systems failed around them, consoles exploding in showers of sparks. Mason felt the deck lurch beneath his feet as the Dominion began to tear itself apart. With a final risky move, they used the ship's own malfunctioning systems against the Emperor. A surge of raw power coursed through the armor, overloading its circuits. The Emperor fell, his invulnerable shell finally breached. Mason stared in disbelief, then snapped back to reality as another explosion rocked the chamber. "We need to move," Gruss shouted, already dragging Mason towards the exit. They raced through collapsing corridors, the ship's death throes growing more violent with each passing second. Mason's lungs burned as they finally reached the last evacuation shuttle. The airlock sealed behind them just as the Dominion's reactor went critical. As their small craft hurtled away from the doomed dreadnought, Mason watched through the viewport. The Dominion's death lit up space like a newborn star, a cataclysm visible across the galaxy. In the aftermath, as Alliance ships converged on their position, Mason turned to Gruss. Both were battered, exhausted, but alive. The Kobali met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. The Emperor was defeated, but the war was just getting started. Even as they assessed their victory, reports flooded in of tyrant forces regrouping, leaderless but still a formidable threat. Mason squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Alliance fleet's victory cheer reverberated through the comm channels as Mason and Gruss were brought aboard the flagship. Exhausted but triumphant, they watched the last remnants of the Dominion disintegrate against the starfield. Their moment of respite was short-lived. Within hours, reports flooded in from across the galaxy, oppressed worlds rising up against their tyrant overlords, casting off the yoke of subjugation. Mason allowed himself a small smile, but Gruss's reptilian features remained tense. "This isn't over," the Kobali lieutenant growled, his claws tapping a staccato rhythm on the briefing room table. Mason nodded grimly. "The tyrants won't go down without a fight." As if summoned by their words, alarms blared throughout the ship. A holographic display flickered to life, showing multiple tyrant strike forces converging on key Alliance positions. "By the void," Mason breathed, watching as shipyards and command centers erupted in flames. How did they organize this so quickly? The answer came in the form of Grand Admiral Gortan, the tyrant's most brilliant tactician. His face appeared on screens across the Alliance fleet, a sneer twisting his features. "You may have killed our Emperor," Gortan's voice boomed, "but the tyrant empire endures. Witness the price of your hollow victory." The transmission cut off, replaced by real-time footage of Alliance worlds burning. Mason's fist clenched as he watched years of hard-fought progress unravel before his eyes. In the chaos that followed, Mason and Gruss found themselves thrust into a new role. The Alliance brass, desperate to stem the tide of tyrant retaliation, conscripted them to lead a newly formed vanguard regiment. "Your mission," Admiral Thrace explained, her hologram flickering as another nearby station took a hit, "is to disrupt Gortan's offensives before they can gain momentum. Hit hard, hit fast, and get out." Mason nodded, already formulating strategies. "We'll need the best pilots, the most advanced ships." "You'll have them," Thrace cut him off. Now go. We're running out of time. The next weeks were a blur of lightning raids and harrowing escapes. Mason and Gruss pushed their vanguard teams to the limit, striking at Tyrant supply lines and command nodes with surgical precision. For a time, it seemed they might turn the tide. Then came New Gibraltar. The Vanguard's intel had pointed to a major Tyrant staging area on the mining colony. Mason led the assault personally, confident they could cripple Gortan's next offensive before it began. Instead, they flew straight into an ambush. "Evasive maneuvers," Mason shouted as Tyrant warships materialized from the planet's shadow. "How did they know we were coming?" Gruss's reply was lost in the roar of explosions as half their strike force vanished in balls of plasma fire. They barely escaped with their lives, limping back to Alliance space with a fraction of their original strength. It wasn't an isolated incident. Time and again, the Vanguard's most carefully planned operations were met with overwhelming Tyrant resistance. The hunters had become the hunted. "We've been compromised," Gruss hissed during a tense strategy session. "There's no other explanation." Mason nodded, his face haggard from too many sleepless nights. "A spy? But who?" Their answer came in the form of a grainy transmission, intercepted from a known Tyrant communication relay. The figure on the screen was distorted, but the voice sent chills down Mason's spine. "Obsidian Cell reporting," the shadowy figure intoned. "The next Vanguard target will be—" Mason shut off the recording, his mind racing. "We need to find these traitors, now!" What followed was a relentless manhunt, stretching from neon-drenched spaceports to the darkest reaches of the galactic fringe. Mason and Gruss delved into a shadowy world of information brokers and black market tech, always one step behind their quarry. Meanwhile, Gortan's forces rampaged unchecked across Alliance space. World after world fell to the Tyrant onslaught, their defenses crumbling in the face of inside information. It was on Nyx, a lawless hub of illicit data trafficking, that they finally caught a break. Gruss's contacts in the criminal underworld pointed them towards a high-security data vault, said to contain files on every major intelligence operation in the sector. The infiltration was a knife's-edge affair, relying on split-second timing and a series of forged credentials that would disintegrate under prolonged scrutiny. Mason held his breath as the vault's final security measure scanned his retinal pattern. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then with a pneumatic hiss, the door slid open. "We're in," Mason whispered, stepping into the cavernous data archive. "Let's find what we came for and get out." They worked feverishly, sifting through terabytes of classified information. It was Gruss who found it first, his scaled hand freezing over a particular data node. "Mason," he said, his voice tight with shock, "you need to see this." The file opened, revealing a face Mason had hoped never to see again. Commander Zar Kath, the Tyrant special ops leader they'd fought on Bastion Prime, stared back at them from the screen. "Impossible," Mason breathed. "We killed him." But the evidence was undeniable. Zar Kath had survived, subjected himself to monstrous augmentation procedures, and now stood as the mastermind behind the Obsidian Cell. A proximity alarm blared, cutting short their revelation. "We've overstayed our welcome," Gruss growled, already moving towards the exit. They fought their way out of the vault, alarms screaming in their wake. As they sprinted for their extraction point, Mason's mind raced with the implications of what they'd discovered. The true battle was just beginning. Armed with the knowledge of Zar Kath's survival and the existence of the Obsidian Cell, Mason and Gruss raced back to Alliance headquarters, their minds reeling from the implications. Days of frantic decryption followed, Alliance codebreakers working around the clock to unravel the web of Obsidian Cell communications. When the final piece fell into place, the truth hit like a plasma round to the chest. "By the void," Admiral Thrace breathed, staring at the holographic display. "A shipyard in Ruvia." The shattered remnants of the Ruvia system hung before them, a graveyard of radioactive debris concealing Grand Admiral Gortan's ultimate gambit. Alliance long-range scans revealed the ghostly outlines of massive structures hidden within the radioactive clouds, the skeletal frames of Apocalypse-class dreadnoughts. Mason's fist clenched. If those ships launch— They won't, Gruss interrupted, his reptilian eyes narrowing. We strike first. The plan came together with brutal efficiency. A vanguard task force comprised of the most elite human and Kobali operatives would penetrate the shipyard's defenses under the cover of Ruvia's radiation storms. Mason and Gruss would lead from the front, as always. Their stealth dropships punched through the radioactive debris field, proximity alarms screaming as chunks of planetary crust threatened to shred their hulls. Mason gritted his teeth, fighting the nausea induced by the erratic maneuvers. 30 seconds to insertion, the pilot's voice crackled over the comm. Mason turned to the grim-faced operatives lining the troop bay. Human cyber warfare experts checked their neural interfaces, while Kobali commandos chambered rounds in sleek sniper rifles. You know the stakes, Mason said, his voice steady despite the turbulence. We fail here, and there won't be an alliance left to save. The dropship's bay doors hissed open, revealing the chaotic shipyard perimeter. Mason led the charge, mag boots clamping onto the twisted hull of a half-constructed frigate. Tyrant defense turrets swiveled, searching for targets amid the swirling radiation. Cyber warfare team, begin systems intrusion, Mason ordered, unslinging his pulse rifle. Kobali squads, secure those Tyrant shuttles. We'll need them for boarding actions. The shipyard erupted into frenzied activity as alarms blared. Swarms of robotic sentries poured from access hatches, their weapons filling the void with crisscrossing energy beams. Mason dove for cover behind a buckled bulkhead, returning fire as Gruss orchestrated the Kobali counterattack. Mason, Gruss shouted over the comm. We've got a problem. Look! Through the radioactive haze, Mason saw it. A colossus of gleaming black metal and pulsing energy conduits. An apocalypse dreadnought in the final stages of construction. Its main cannon was already powering up, tendrils of destructive energy coalescing at its muzzle. All units scatter, Mason roared. The dreadnought's cannon fired, a lance of pure annihilation that vaporized an entire section of the shipyard. Tyrant and Alliance forces alike were reduced to their component atoms in an instant. New plan, Mason said, his mind racing. Gruss, take your best marksman and keep that cannon's firing solutions disrupted. I'm going to try something insane. Without waiting for a response, Mason sprinted towards a cluster of deactivated Tyrant war droids. The titanic constructs loomed over him, their weapons cold and lifeless. For now. Cyber warfare team, he barked into his comm. I need control of these droids, now. The human tech experts worked feverishly, their neural interfaces glowing as they bypassed firewalls and rewrote command protocols. One by one, the war droid's eyes flickered to life, a deep crimson shifting to Alliance blue. Good, Mason said, allowing himself a grim smile. Now, let's give Gortan a taste of his own medicine. The reprogrammed war droids lumbered forward, their massive gun arms opening up on the Apocalypse dreadnought. Mason watched in awe as salvos of hypervelocity rounds battered against the warship's energy shields. Gruss, status? Mason demanded. Cannons offline for now, the Kobali responded, the crack of his sniper rifle punctuating each word. But they're adapting. We need to end this fast. Mason nodded, though Gruss couldn't see him. Agreed. All Vanguard units converge on the Apocalypse. We're taking that ship. What followed was a mad scramble across the twisted wreckage of the shipyard. Mason led from the front, his armor blackened by near misses as Tyrant defenders poured fire into their advance. Gruss and his sniper teams provided vital covering fire, their precision shots dropping shield generators and weapons emplacements with surgical precision. They reached the Apocalypse's yawning docking bay, only to be met by a wall of automated defense turrets. Mason watched in horror as the first wave of Vanguard troops were cut down, their bodies drifting lifelessly into the void. We need a breach, Gruss shouted, his voice strained. Now! Mason's mind raced, assessing their dwindling options. Then he saw it, a massive fuel line feeding into the dreadnought's propulsion systems. All units, target that fuel conduit, he ordered, already bringing his rifle to bear. A hail of Alliance fire converged on the vulnerable pipeline. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a silent flash that lit up the entire shipyard, the fuel line ruptured. The explosion tore through the docking bay's defenses, giving the Vanguard the opening they desperately needed. "Go, go, go!" Mason roared, leading the charge into the breached dreadnought. The interior of the Apocalypse was a maze of twisting corridors and soaring chambers. Tyrant crew and security forces rallied, mounting a fierce defense of their prize vessel. Mason and Gruss fought side by side, their years of shared combat experience allowing them to anticipate each other's moves. They battled their way towards the bridge, leaving a trail of destroyed security checkpoints and disabled weapon systems in their wake. With each deck they secured, Alliance cyber warfare experts worked to subvert the ship's systems. Finally, they reached the command deck. The massive armored doors stood as the last obstacle between them and victory. Mason turned to Gruss, both of them battered and breathing heavily. "Together?" Mason asked. Gruss nodded, a fierce grin splitting his reptilian features. "Together." They breached the bridge in a storm of gunfire and brutal close-quarters combat. Mason's world narrowed to a series of snapshot images, the flash of his rifle, the spray of tyrant blood, the satisfying crunch as Gruss's fist connected with an enemy's face. When the smoke cleared, they stood victorious. The bridge crew lay dead or incapacitated around them. Mason strode to the main command console, his fingers flying over the controls. "Redirect main power to weapons," he ordered the Alliance techs. "Let's turn this monster against its masters." The Apocalypse shuddered as its systems came under Alliance control. On the main view screen, Mason watched as the Dreadnought's weapon batteries opened up on the surrounding Tyrant forces. Unfinished ship frames crumbled under the onslaught, and defensive platforms shattered like glass. "Captain," one of the human cyber warfare experts called out, her voice urgent, "I'm detecting a high-priority transmission leaving the system. Encryption suggests it's—" "Gorton!" Gruss snarled, finishing the thought. Mason's eyes sharp. The Tyrant Admiral had slipped away, but the cost to his forces was catastrophic. As Alliance reinforcements poured into the system, the full extent of their victory became clear. The Apocalypse shipyard was in ruins, its deadly cargo reduced to drifting wreckage. He turned to Gruss, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "We did it." The Kabali warrior nodded, his own fatigue showing through his stoic demeanor. "For now, but Gorton is still out there, and Zarkath—" Mason's reply was cut short by a priority alert on the command console. His eyes widened as he scanned the incoming transmission. "New orders," he said, his voice grim. "We're not done yet." "New orders," Mason said, his voice grim. "We're not done yet." Gruss leaned in, scanning the priority transmission. His reptilian eyes narrowed. "A lull in the fighting? That's unlike Gorton." Mason nodded, already moving towards the Apocalypse's command and control center. "We need to capitalize on this. Get me a secure line to Alliance High Command." Hours stretched into days as Mason and Gruss worked tirelessly to strengthen the Alliance's position. Holographic displays flickered with schematics of new hybrid warships, melding human ingenuity with Kabali weaponry and Grand Council shielding technology. "The Tyrants won't know what hit them," Mason murmured, studying the sleek lines of a prototype destroyer. Gruss grunted in agreement, his attention focused on a different hologram. "Joint command structures. It's the logical next step. No more siloed tactics." Their plans were barely set in motion when the news hit. Alliance intelligence networks lit up with urgent reports. Mason's blood ran cold as he processed the incoming data. "Gorton, you bastard," he whispered. The Tyrant Admiral had struck deep into Alliance space, seizing multiple inhabited worlds. Grainy footage showed masses of civilians being herded onto transport ships, destined for unknown locations. "Human shields," Gruss snarled, his scales overflowing with anger. "He's using them to slow us down." Mason's mind raced, weighing options and discarding them just as quickly. A frontal assault was out of the question. The civilian death toll would be catastrophic. They needed a scalpel, not a hammer. "Precision raids," he said finally. "We go in small, fast, and quiet. Hit them before they know we're there." What followed was a grueling campaign of stealth and misdirection. Mason and Gruss led from the front, their teams slipping past tyrant patrols and ships that seemed to vanish from sensors. World after world, they sowed chaos behind enemy lines, freeing captives and sabotaging tyrant operations. On Nebulon Prime, Mason's team hijacked the planet's automated defense grid, turning orbital cannons against the tyrant ships in high orbit. As panicked civilians streamed towards Alliance evacuation ships, Gruss and his Kabali commandos engaged in brutal close-quarters combat through twisting urban corridors. Their string of successes came to an abrupt halt at Avalor. The moment their stealth shuttles entered the system, alarms blared throughout the cockpit. "Multiple impacts," the pilot shouted. "We've lost stealth systems." Mason cursed, strapping himself in as the shuttle began evasive maneuvers. Through the view screen, he saw the source of their trouble. Massive asteroids tethered in a complex array, each one jam-packed with jamming technology. "Gortan," Gruss growled. "He anticipated us." They barely escaped with their lives, watching helplessly as tyrant ships descended on Avalor's gleaming cities. The failure stung, but worse was yet to come. Hours later, Mason stood rigid before a holographic display, his face ashen. Beside him, Gruss trembled with terrifying fury. On the screen, Grand Admiral Gortan's face loomed large, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. Behind him, rows of terrified Avalorian citizens knelt at gunpoint. "One galactic cycle," Gortan's voice boomed. "Stand down or watch as I cleanse these worlds one by one." The transmission cut off, leaving Mason and Gruss in stunned silence. Around them, the Alliance Command Center erupted into chaos. Voices rose in anger, demanding immediate retaliation. "We can't give in," an Adari general snarled. "If we show weakness now, Gortan will never stop." "And if we attack," Mason countered, "millions of innocents die. There has to be another way." Gruss's eyes lit up with a dangerous gleam. "There is. We cut the head off the snake." Mason turned to his friend, seeing the outline of a plan forming. "Gortan's command base. If we can reach it..." "We can end this," Gruss finished. As heated debate raged around them, Mason and Gruss huddled over star charts and intelligence reports. They had one shot at this, a desperate gamble with the fate of entire worlds hanging in the balance. "Here," Mason said, zooming in on a patch of seemingly empty space. "The perfect hiding spot for a mobile command center." Gruss nodded, already calculating approach vectors. "We'll need a team. Small, elite. Expendable," Mason added grimly. They shared a look of understanding. This was a one-way mission, with success measured in the lives they might save, not their own survival. As they began assembling their strike force, Mason allowed himself a moment of grim reflection. The coming hours would determine the course of the war, and perhaps the future of the cosmos itself. Mason's fingers flew across the holographic interface, finalizing the details of their risky move. Beside him, Gruss studied the tactical overlay of Gortan's suspected command base. His reptilian eyes narrowed in concentration. "Stealth shuttles are prepped," Gruss reported. "Skeleton crew, minimal life support. We'll be running silent the whole way." Mason nodded, his eyes hardened. "Good. We'll need every advantage we can get." As they made their way to the launch bay, the gravity of their mission settled over them like a shroud. Hand-picked volunteers, human and Kabali alike, waited by the shuttles, their faces grim but determined. "Last chance to back out," Mason said, addressing the assembled team. No one moved. The journey to the Avalor system was a nerve-wracking exercise in precision flying. Debris from shattered ships and orbital platforms littered their path, providing both cover and potential collision hazards. Mason's knuckles turned white as he gripped the shuttle's control yoke, threading the needle between jagged hull fragments and ghostly clouds of frozen atmosphere. A sudden burst of weapons fire lit up the starfield ahead. Mason cursed, throwing the shuttle into a stomach-churning dive. "Tyrant pickets," Gruss growled, monitoring the sensor feeds. "They haven't spotted us yet, but we're running out of cover." As they approached the massive asteroid housing Gortan's base, the true scale of their challenge became apparent. Layered energy fields shimmered across its cratered surface. while swarms of interceptor drones patrolled in intricate patterns. "We'll never punch through that," one of the human techs muttered. Gruse's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. "We don't have to. We just need to blind them." What followed was a carefully choreographed dance of destruction. Unmanned shuttles, loaded with jury-rigged EMP devices, streaked towards the asteroid's defensive grid. Tyrant weapons lashed out, vaporizing several of the decoys, but enough made it through. The detonation was silent in the vacuum of space, but its effects were immediate and catastrophic. A wave of electromagnetic energy washed over the asteroid, shorting out sensors and scrambling targeting systems. "Now," Mason barked, gunning the shuttle's engines. They screamed towards the suddenly vulnerable command bunker, skimming so low that regolith fragments pelted the shuttle's hull. Behind them, Grus and his Kobali commandos touched down, weapons already blazing as they engaged the disoriented Tyrant defenders. Mason led his infiltration team through the labyrinthine corridors of the asteroid base. The acrid smell of burning circuitry filled the air, punctuated by the distant thunder of explosions as Gruse's diversionary assault raged on. They reached the command center only to find it abandoned, holographic displays still flickering with tactical data. Mason's instincts screamed a warning. "It's a trap!" he shouted, but it was too late. A piercing whine filled the air as hidden emitters powered up. Two of the human techs collapsed instantly, blood trickling from their ears and noses. Mason fought through waves of nausea and disorientation, his cybernetic implants straining to counteract the neural feedback. "Disengage! The countermeasures!" he managed to gasp out. The surviving techs worked feverishly, their fingers dancing across alien control surfaces as they sought to neutralize the deadly trap. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer. Mason's comm crackled to life, Grus's voice strained and urgent. "Mason, we're overrun. Gortan's personal guard. They're unlike anything we've faced. We can't hold them back much longer." The feed dissolved into static, punctuated by the unmistakable sound of weapons fire. Mason's blood ran cold as he realized the terrible choice before him. With a final, wrenching effort, he tore himself away from the comm panel. There would be time for grief later, if they survived. Right now, their only hope lay in the asteroid's data core. "Keep working on those countermeasures," he ordered the techs. "I'm going in." Mason plunged into the virtual landscape of Gortan's systems, his consciousness merging with the alien architecture. It was a maze of fractal geometries and pulsing data streams, each path a potential dead end or lethal honey trap. Time lost all meaning as Mason navigated the digital labyrinth. He was dimly aware of alarms blaring in the physical world, of the sound of Tyrant troops breaching the outer defenses, but his focus remained laser-sharp, pushing through firewalls and rerouting command protocols. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, he found it, the master override that would sever Gortan's iron grip on the occupied worlds. With the last reserves of his strength, Mason triggered the sequence. Reality came crashing back as Mason's mind disengaged from the data core. He found himself alone in the command center, the bodies of his team strewn around him. The silence was deafening. Somehow, he dragged himself to a nearby view screen. What he saw stole his breath away. Across the Avalor system, the chains of oppression were breaking. Tyrant ships hung dead in space, their crews incapacitated by the same neural feedback that had nearly claimed Mason. On the planets below, liberated populations rose up against their stunned oppressors. Victory, it seemed, had come at an unimaginable cost. As consciousness began to fade, Mason caught a glimpse of movement. A group of terrified civilians, newly freed from Tyrant control, peered into the command center. Their eyes widened as they saw him. "Help him!" one of them cried out. "He's still alive!" Gentle hands lifted Mason, carrying him towards an uncertain future. As darkness claimed him, his last thoughts were of Grus and the brave souls who had sacrificed everything for this moment. The war might be over, but its echoes would resonate for generations to come.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.